From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Biden and former President Donald Trump finally agreed to a schedule for presidential debates. Earlier than ever, they'll be held, and with significant changes to the usual formats. Who won this exchange over the debates, and which candidate is likely to benefit when they do meet? Plus, Joe Biden continues to trail Donald Trump in two new major media polls. We'll take a temperature check on where the presidential campaign stands now that the debate calendar is set. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, and this is our opinion podcast, Potomac Watch. And I'm here with two of my colleagues, Monet Ukwe-Barua. Hi, Monet.
Hello, Paul.
And Kyle Peterson. Kyle, familiar to you all. Hi, Kyle.
Hi.
So the debate calendar is set. Joe Biden accepted Donald Trump's challenge, which he'd been making for weeks, trying to get Joe Biden to debate him, notwithstanding the fact that Trump refused to debate his Republican challengers in the primaries. And finally, Joe Biden said yes. He declared in a clip that they sent out on social media that he'll accept two debates, not the usual three. There'll be no role this time for the Commission on Presidential Debates, which has been running debates for decades. There'll be no audience for the debate, just the TV studio and the moderator. The two hosts will be the mainstream media outfits, CNN and ABC, both of which have cultures which, let's say, are not friendly to Donald Trump. And perhaps most significant, the first debate is going to be very early, June 27th, which is even before the two candidates will be formally nominated by their parties. The second would be on September 10th. That's the ABC debate. So, Monet, what have we learned from all of this about the reason that Biden decided to go ahead with debates, essentially calling Trump's bluff and then setting these limited terms?
Well, the reason Biden decided it was time to publicly call for debates is a lot to do with the polls, our second topic of conversation in this podcast. I think that it has now been over a month of consistent polls, both nationally and in the swing states specifically, that show Biden trailing, and he knows that he has to do something to change the dynamic of the race. And so the Democrats are betting that Donald Trump, as usual, will be his worst enemy, and that the only way that Biden might be able to regain some ground in these polls is by putting Trump on stage to remind the American people of why they disliked him in the first place and why Biden was able to pull ahead in 2020. If you think back to the debates 4 years ago, particularly in that very first debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Trump really hurt himself. He came out very, very aggressive, trying to knock Biden off balance and see if he could get him to make an embarrassment of himself. But Trump ended up really coming off as very, very unfocused, very, very aggressive in a way that really seemed to hurt him in that performance. And I think Biden is betting that Trump will again be very undisciplined. And so again, he knows that he has to change the dynamic of the race in some way and thinks that sharing a stage with Trump will remind voters of why they decided to move in a different direction in 2020 in the first place.
Interesting, Monet. I mean, Kyle, the other thing that's interesting here, apart from the fact that Biden has decided to go ahead with the debates, which is not risk-free from his point of view, is the terms in which they've set. I mean, it's going to be no audience. Trump, in many ways, feeds off an audience, and he won't have that opportunity. And then I think conceding to these CNN and ABC. I mean, right now, I guess the moderator for CNN is going to be Jake Tapper. Let's just say he's not a Donald Trump admirer, if you have ever watched CNN. He also tends, I'll tell him this to his face, he's arrogant and kind of full of himself as a moderator. And I wonder if he'll have the modesty to be able to recede from asserting himself in the debate and let the two candidates actually duke it out and correct each other rather than have himself intervene and say, oh, no, that's not true, which some debate moderators have done in the past, which I don't think is a good idea here. And then he'll have the ability to shut off the mic of a candidate if he thinks that they are exceeding at his discretion, I guess. Now, one of the issues would be timing, which is fair enough. But what about if he's going on a screed that Jake Tapper doesn't like? Did Trump make a concession that could hurt him?
I think he might have. It's a good question whether the moderators will make the debate about themselves, which we have seen sometimes in the past. On the other hand, in some ways that might work to President Trump's advantage, because one of his great storylines going all the way back to 2015 and 2016 was that the media is not telling you the truth. They're unfair. They're biased against Republicans. They're biased against conservatives. So to the extent that the debate ends up being President Trump fighting with Jake Tapper and letting President Biden recede into the background, that might actually work to the Republicans' advantage. The other thing that I think is interesting and we need to keep in mind, too, is that the parameters of these debates, even the one that is only about a month away in June, seem like they are still a little bit shifting. President Trump has said that he has also agreed unilaterally to show up for a Fox News debate. And so he is going to try to goad President Biden into a friendlier form.
That's not going to happen.
There will no doubt be jockeying over the specific and exact rules about these debates. So one of the stipulations suggested by the Biden campaign would be that it would be just President Trump and President Biden on the stage. And I think President Trump agrees with that, works to his advantage. But CNN now has laid out the rules for its June 27th debate. And it includes a polling threshold of 15%. And then CNN says this, that in Kennedy's case, that would be Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's not an impossibility that he would make the stage for that debate.
What, 15%?
15%, correct.
He's showing up in the latest Fox poll at 11.
And the CNN write-up says he's averaging about 13%. But it does suggest that both of the candidates are ceding some control, at least as we have the rules right now, to the news organizations that are hosting these debates. And you can bet, even in the days and hours leading up to the moment when they're going to get on stage, there's going to be arguments about what exactly the rules are going to be and how stringently they're going to be enforced.
Another question here is the timing of the debate. Maybe the most striking fact is that the first one is June 27th, second one September 10th. And I think it's important that the debates be held before early voting is too much underway in the autumn. And now we have some states starting 45 days before the election day with early voting. So the September 10th makes logical sense. June 27th? Wow, they won't even be formally the candidates. Now, nobody thinks that they will not be the candidates, but there is some speculation that, in addition to your point, which I think is probably the right one, Monet, that Biden wants to shift the dynamics of the race. Pro voters, number one, I've still got it, okay, and relieve that anxiety. And then Trump may indeed blow up, as want to do. But I suppose, if Biden does very, very poorly on his feet for 90 minutes, there's still time for Democrats to pull the plug.
It's not impossible. I do think that the Democrats are definitely considering Biden's performance as an indicator of whether he does still have the juice, so to speak, to really contest this election at all, or whether the polls are going to continue to worsen as more Americans start paying attention and seeing how languid he looks out in public. And so it will definitely be a turning point in terms of the enthusiasm for a lot of Democrats. But is it logistically possible at this point to potentially convince him to step aside or to organize some sort of change at the convention? I think that would be very, very difficult to do. And I think that having that change take place so late would also really damage the Democrats' credibility. And you can imagine the field day that Trump would have saying, look at this party, the chaos that they're in, look at how weak Biden is. They're trying to stand up some kind of replacement, but I think that the American voters would not be particularly enthusiastic to get on board with the Democratic replacement for Biden in that situation, and it would really strengthen Trump's position. So I don't think we should anticipate that. I think that coming before the convention basically will help both of these candidates, I think, to shore up their position with their respective parties and bases. And also, it's a concession to the reality of how early voting has begun nowadays, and want to make sure voters are able to perform their impressions of the candidates before they potentially cast those ballots.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have more on the debate over debates and then the polling, where the presidential race stands here a little less than 6 months out when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch with Monet Ukwe-Barua and Kyle Peterson. So we're talking about the presidential debates. And one other question I want to get in before we go into who's going to do better is both candidates have dispensed with the Commission on Presidential Debates. Kyle, Why do you think they did that?
I think some of it is because the commission had already set its dates for the 3 debates that it was planning to host, and none of them were as early as President Trump wanted or apparently as early as President Biden wanted. And the commission is a Washington institution. It's been hosting these debates since 1988. And from the Republican point of view, it has been pretty heavy-handed. So the GOP has argued for a year or two now it was not intending to participate in any debates that were hosted by the commission. What is more fascinating is to see Democrats and President Biden land in that same sort of position. And the argument against the commission was always that if there was no commission, if there was no third party setting the terms of these debates, the two candidates would probably have a pretty strong incentive to come to their own agreement. And the commission's response, I think, the argument against was that how can you really expect Republicans and Democrats to agree on these kinds of details? One of them will see an advantage in not debating. But there's pretty strong, I think, voter interest in this. And I think voters would hold it against a candidate who refused to step on stage, especially a candidate who is 81 or 77, as the case may be. But there are always debates in Senate races, in gubernatorial races. There is no body on Mount Olympus that sets the terms for those. The two campaigns kind of jostle, and then they figure out when and where and how they're going to meet.
Yeah, I think it's a good decision to dispense with the commission. There's unelected, let the candidates do it. And the public pressure to have a debate, I think, probably would have prevailed in the end. So the question is, who's likely to gain more from the debates? Benet, the Biden campaign thinks it's likely to shake things up a bit and Trump could implode. My own sense is that Biden also has a chance to help himself because the public has real doubts about his ability to perform the job of the presidency across another 4 years. He will be 82 when he takes the next oath of office if he wins. Donald Trump would be 78, but is a much more vigorous man at this stage of his life. Biden is visibly reduced in terms of his ability to maintain his focus and concentration of thought. He's heavily scripted by his aides. He's heavily protected by his aides to the extent that they now form a phalanx as he walks to the helicopter, Marine One helicopter, out of the Rose Garden to go to an event. If he can show for 90 minutes or so that he can hold up against Trump in a debate, sound coherent, sound strong, that could arguably help him.
I think that that's definitely true, and we've seen it before. I think that some of Biden's critics will often come out before any public appearance of his and set the expectations so low that all he has to do essentially is get off a few good coherent sentences, seem to be fully awake, and he then gets glowing praise for his performance. I think that that happened again in that first debate that he had with Donald Trump in 2020. It also happened earlier this year in the State of the Union address. I do think that a lot of the glowing praise he got after that was wishful thinking on the part of Democrats who wanted to cast it as a turning point in the election, which it didn't happen to be. But still, Biden has proven that he can compose himself enough to be able to perform for 90 minutes or so while the camera is on him. And if he does that, and again, if it's contrasted with Trump seeming very scattered, aggressive, and chaotic, that definitely could boost Biden's reputation in the eyes of some of the more moderate voters out there who are looking for a safe pair of hands on the wheel of American state. But I do also think it's worth remembering that Biden has been selling his economic agenda. He's been selling his foreign policy. He's been making a pitch for how he's performed over the course of the past 4 years. And voters just are not buying, no matter what he says, no matter how they try to portray hiring and Bidenomics, no matter how they try to portray his strategy in the Middle East and Ukraine. Voters seem to think that he's doing a very poor job. And I think that Trump has the advantage in the sense that voters really want to hear him make an alternative case for how he's handled these things. They think they already know what Biden has to offer. And so Trump has an opportunity, again, if he's able to stay even just a little bit focused and describe what he would change in some of these issues, of really convincing a lot of swing voters that it's worth taking a chance on change. And so having the two men on stage in that way to contrast their records and their plans, I think has an advantage for Trump.
All right, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we'll focus on where the race stands right now, the race for the White House between an incumbent president and a former president for the first time in over a century.